Hello and welcome to this NDTV special. It's been a stormy few days for Indian cricket and it's perennially stormy season for Indian politics. Joining us now on this special program is somebody who's weathered both storms more than once, somebody who wears two hats. He's of course a senior office bearer of the cricket board, but he's also the leader of opposition in the Rajya Sabha. Arun Jaitley, it seems that in a country where cricket is often called something akin to a religion, the politics of cricket has overtaken the game of cricket. Would you concede that?
Well, in any body which is democratically elected, where people get elected or people lose elections, there's bound to be some politics. But I can assure you that conventionally, the administration of cricket in India has conventionally been a good administration. It's met with challenges, it's met with crisis, as in the present case. But then the game of cricket eventually overtakes everything else. The sport is bigger than any man, and that's what's been proved even now.
Are you satisfied with the outcome of what happened in the end? This was a battle that played out in the full public glare. Television channels and newspapers took a position.
Well, I won't say that I am fully satisfied.
You're not fully satisfied.
And I must tell you the reason for this. You see, the game of cricket is synonymous with fairness. And therefore, when you have three players being arrested because they are involved in some unfair practice which graduates into fixing, or a relative of a senior board official is allegedly involved in betting, it casts very serious doubts. And therefore, it calls for a very strong action. I would have been happier if the kind of arrangement we were arrived at had been cordially arrived at on day 1 rather than on day 8 or day 9.
So you don't have a problem with the arrangement and the solution, you have a problem with how long it took.
You see, you can always have two views on the solution. For instance, the President was asked to step aside. I made the request to him in the very first instance.
Did you propose stepping down or stepping aside?
No, I had initially suggested to him stepping aside because that was the demand raised by a large number of members. So when I met him, and I said, await an inquiry. The inquiry must be fair, the inquiry must be credible, and the alternative arrangement which is made when you are out of the board, because there is only 4 months left of his tenure, must be a credible alternative because cricket has a level of public accountability. At that time, my suggestion didn't find favor. It took a couple of days before I think wiser counsel prevailed.
There are those within your board. You have people like I.S. Bindra who have got very upset, and they've said, I was the only one who asked for Srinivasan to step down, and Arun Jaitley got his way. This was Arun Jaitley's formula to create a kind of interim cushioning for N. Srinivasan. He's even used the phrase the Delhi gang. The Delhi gang had its way.
I don't want to get into an exchange of words. Maybe I didn't hear some things which he claims to have said.
In other words, he didn't ask for Srinivasan to step down?
But I don't want to join issue on that. He's a very senior administrator himself. But all that I would like to say is that at the very outset in the meeting, I made a few suggestions. A, the President must step aside. B, a credible alternative must be there. C, the inquiry must be absolutely fair. And D, we must respond to various elements of public accountability of the board. And most members did support it. And since this suggestion did find an overwhelming support in the board, the President yielded to it and steps aside.
Here's what a lot of people who know you, who heard your speeches in Parliament want to understand about the position you took on cricket, which is different from the position you take as a politician. And here's the question. The question is that in public life, in politics, the BJP has often said ex-minister should step down, the Prime Minister should step down, so-and-so should step down. It's never step aside. You don't say Pawan Bansal should step aside till the probe is over.
No.
You say Pawan Bansal should step down.
It's logically correct that there is no provision in politics or in ministerial assignments for stepping aside. There is no such provision.
But shouldn't the principle of probity be the same?
No, the principle of probity must always be the same. And therefore, if you step aside from a position in the board and you are asked to maintain an arm's length distance, with an undertaking that you will discharge no function, and he himself says, I will discharge no function, somebody else will be discharging those functions. Effectively, he's on paper in office, but he's not there. And therefore, I don't want to squabble over what words are used, aside or down.
Aren't they two substantively different?
No, they are different words, but in implementation, the effect today is de facto the same. The effect of being the same, and this is more doable under the present circumstances. An ideal situation is not always achieved, and being more doable, I think what we achieved was that we put an alternative in place, and I would like to give that alternative a chance to see whether they can clean up the situation, whether there can be an independent probe, and accountabilities can be fixed.
The alternative that you have put in place has also been described as contentious. Jagmohan Dalmia comes to the seat with his own histories. Everybody has a history. He comes to the post with his own history. Well, do you see him as an interim president? Because cricket observers point out that the BCCI constitution does not strictly have provision for an interim president. He's made it clear that he's going to be no rubber stamp.
No, he's a very senior administrator, and he's an experienced man, completely committed to the game. I have no reason to doubt that he won't do a fair job. But we have 4 months of this year's term left. The inquiry will take some reasonable time. Mr. Dalmia will function independently. He will take approval of the board. And in the month of September, the BCCI constitution itself will operate. BCCI elections are always held in September, and so too this year they'll be held. The members will get a chance to elect whoever they want.
You initially proposed, reports suggest, Shashank Manohar's name as one of the possible successors. Why did that not come through?
Well, I don't want to get into the individuals and what happened really in the meeting. I would have been extremely happy, let me say so, because I think Shashank has impeccable credentials. He's retired from the board. He says he has no intentions of coming back to the board. He's a very honorable man, and therefore I would have personally liked to see him, and therefore I had, even without his consent, suggested his name. I would have been very happy for it, but then when members agreed on Mr. Dalmia's name, who's a very good name also, a very experienced person, I don't think this was an occasion for us to squabble over names.
Srinivasan wanted you to take over the mantle. You said no, you said this is an election year. Do you see that refusal to be an interim refusal? Will Arun Jaitley be the next BCCI president?
No, my priority is elsewhere, and it's well known, it's in public gaze. And therefore, when I was asked that can I spend a lot of time this year, the answer is no, I can't spend it.
So even post-September, if that
we'll see the situation in September, but currently I can only tell you, I don't want to visualize what happens in September, but I can only tell you one thing. Currently, this is an election year, and my priority is my party. My priority is not elsewhere.
So this year, till the elections are over, you don't see yourself having time for a larger role?
I hope it goes this way. That's my mind.
Let me ask you on cricket in the end, that when you say you were less than satisfied, what exactly are you less than satisfied about? Because this has been an unsavory episode for cricket lovers in this country.
I'll tell you, the fact that there is betting in elections, betting in various sports, huge betting in cricket, it's itself a matter of concern. But when insiders get involved in that betting transforms into fixing. And I think this is a very serious challenge to the fairness of the game in India as anywhere else in the world, and that leaves me hugely uneasy. And therefore, I would like to see whoever is responsible by a fair mechanism, the accountability process is now set into motion and taken to its logical conclusion.
But is the answer to stop after game parties and cheer girls? Is a sort of moral crackdown, as it were, the answer to the absence of essential morality?
I think Mr. Dalmia has made some suggestions. The board will get a chance to discuss
What do you
proposals.
personally think?
Well, from what I hear is that as far as the parties are concerned, I am per se not against parties. Everybody is a social animal, he goes to parties. But are these the meeting place for bookies and players? If that is so, then I'd rather not have parties.
And cheer girls?
Well, that's not cricket. I think that's only adding a little glamour. I will be quite happy with them, without them. I'm indifferent to that proposal.
To those Arun Jaitley who have raised larger questions about whether politicians should be in sports. You heard a statement from the Prime Minister saying cricket and politics should not be mixed. These are truisms. Cricket and politics are mixed. The very management of this game is essentially by politicians.
That's a template. I think if you're a sports lover, you can be in the game. If you have nothing to do with the concern for the game, you should not be there. But I can only say one fact in support of politicians. Politicians are the only community in India who have high levels of accountability. We respond to public criticism. I am giving you an interview on all doubts that you have in mind. we get criticized for what we have not even done. Non-politicians don't measure up to that level of accountability.
So if Mr. Srinivasan were a politician, he would have had it very different.
Maybe his reactions would
There
have
would
been
be no
different.
step aside available to him.
Maybe their reactions would have been different.
But do you think the BCCI is the only bipartisan body in India? There has been this talk about it being this, perhaps the only forum where Arun Jaitley and Rajiv Shukla will not disagree.
You see, I'll tell you, conventionally, but for these crises which comes up, we had a crisis in year 2000.
Yeah.
Last year we had a crisis where in domestic cricket some players were involved and you had 2-3 days of bad publicity. Now we overcome those crises. So you have these crisis situations, but I have felt that the board that I have seen closely and from a distance, by and large, it was a well-managed institution.
So you're not cynical?
I am certainly not cynical. There can't be a substitute to a board. After all, you need the governance of the game, and it's no mean achievement that we are world leaders in the game. And therefore, at the end of the day, even though we have problems, we have hiccups, the answer is not to escape. The answer is to correct them, and answer is to let the game of the cricket prevail, and ultimately the game is much taller than either the board or any individual administering the board.
Okay, let's move from the cricket pitch to the political pitch. Now we have this scenario where your party is going to hold its national executive later this weekend, but you also have easily your senior most leader, LK Advani, having queered the pitch, since pitch is the idiom of this interview. He's queered the pitch by praising one of your chief ministers, pitting him against the other, Shivraj Singh Chauhan vis-a-vis Narendra Modi. Now, it's all very well for the BJP to platitudinally say that the media has misunderstood the statements. But look at the statement, Arun Jaitley. And you were there. Look at the statement. LK Advani is talking about how Madhya Pradesh was a tougher state than Gujarat to actually turn around. That's point one. Point two, comparing Shivraj Singh Chauhan to Atal Bihari Vajpayee, talking about how he's a humble leader. Did you not see that as a swipe against Narendra Modi?
I think it's very easy to hair split a speech and therefore give different meanings to it. Let's first talk of Madhya Pradesh, we'll then talk of Gujarat. And I don't mind a comparison. You see, both states operate in different level spheres. I was in charge of the BJP in 2003 when we dethroned the Congress government led by Mr. Digvijay Singh, and the BJP was voted to power. I think the parameters of infrastructure and development in Madhya Pradesh were extremely poor. This was the first BSP, the Bijli Sadak Pani election, if you remember. The roads were bad, electricity was only for a couple of hours every day, there was no irrigation water available, there was no industry in the state, and there was a cynical attitude in the whole state. Today, Madhya Pradesh has a fair network of roads. Madhya Pradesh has almost achieved 24 hours electricity in a period of 10 years. Madhya Pradesh, even by some exemplary steps, including interconnection of rivers in some states, which did not create any ecological disadvantage, has improved the irrigation, and now I am told some connectivity in the Malwa region is taking place, which will add further. For 7 years, you had a 10% growth rate. You have an 18% agricultural growth rate. Madhya Pradesh is out of the Bemaru status, and therefore Madhya Pradesh is truly a turnaround story. There are other states which are also moving in that same direction.
Yet this successful chief minister does not find a place in your parliamentary board.
That he would.
That's intra-party politics.
That's not intra-party politics. I can tell you, Shivraj is very highly regarded within the BJP. Now, you have Chhattisgarh, which is turning around. You have Bihar, which is turning around. Therefore, these are all turnaround stories, and Madhya Pradesh leads the turnaround story. Now, let's come to Gujarat. Gujarat is a manufacturing state. Gujarat has a 1400 kilometer or so coastline. Gujarat has all those advantages. Gujarat had very poor irrigation. Thanks to the Narmada water and some rainfall, Gujarat has gone into a double-digit agricultural growth rate. For a developed state, it's easy to say that, well, it's developed further. But for a developed state, where the base of the economy is much larger, to consistently grow at about 9 to 10% every year. And Gujarat has continuously done it. You see, the United States is a developed economy. If it grows by 3%, the world shakes. Therefore, they don't grow by 8-9%. Gujarat in India is amongst the developed states. And for a developed state to grow at 9 to 10% is a huge achievement. It attracts one of the largest investments in the country. It has one of the best infrastructures. And therefore, even though Gujarat had conventional advantages, But the rapid pace at which Gujarat has come into focus in the last decade or so, I think is a huge achievement. Now what happens is that Mr. Advani makes a statement and his formulation is, look where a good state has been taken by him. He praises him and then he says, this was a very difficult story, it's a turnaround story. Now you can...
you think the statement was innocuous?
Well, I think...
Let's be honest here. Do you really believe the statement was innocuous?
I would not like to be unfair to Mr. Advani. I've known him for almost decades. I worked under him. I still work under him. And I think this hair splitting to say, well, he praised one more than the other, so he is an unfair guardian. But that kind of an impression which is being created, I don't think is being fair to the gentleman. He praised both states effectively, and that's what a senior in the party must do.
Would you concede that at the moment here is the dilemma for your party? Do you go ahead and respond to the mood of your cadres? Even your party president has said Narendra Modi is the most popular leader that you have today. Do you respond to that mood and either declare him prime ministerial candidate or at the very least the head of...
Well, I can straight away tell you that it's a very challenging choice.
Why is it a challenging choice?
I'll tell you it's a very challenging choice. The party has to take a decision.
Yeah.
There's a dynamism in the decision-making process of a party. And I think there's fairness also. Now, if you look at the whole issue fairly, why alone BJP? In the BJP, Narendra Modi's popularity is as high as possible. There's almost a groundswell in his favor. I've repeatedly said this. I can, for the last 1.5 to 2 years, see this groundswell actually demonstrating itself. If you see all the opinion polls, which reflect on a public opinion outside the BJP also, he stands much taller than the others.
Then why isn't it an automatic choice? Why is it a challenging choice?
Therefore, in order to determine a choice, you factor in various considerations, you factor in the timing, you factor in the merits and demerits of what you have to do, and that dynamism of the decision-making process will lead you to that decision. That's where we are standing today. Now, for the media, which has a lot of curiosity in Narendra Modi to say, well, declare him right now, one way or the other. I think when we decide what we are to do, the media can wait. But the media has a right to speculate, and therefore I'm conceding that right.
All right, let's step aside from the question of whether he will be a prime ministerial candidate and go to a simpler question. Will he be the head of your campaign committee? Now, that for somebody you call your most popular leader should almost be automatic.
Well, I think that's
Were it not for the fact that you have an LK Advani today asking Nitin Gadkari, whom he ousted as president, to take over that pole?
No, I think you see, within the party, a lot of discussions take place as to what responsibility is to be given to whom. Now, the good thing about Indian political parties is, and the Indian media is, that everything that goes on within parties almost gets known to the media on a minute-to-minute basis.
We're good at our job also.
So you're good
and there are enough people willing to talk.
Yes. And therefore, these discussions go outside. There's nothing wrong in it. After all, we are not a secret organization. If our internal discussions get leaked out, so be it. Now, these are various proposals under considerations. Now, various proposals under considerations should not be viewed with some kind of a motivation given by somebody. After all, Nitin Gadkari, as a president of the BJP for 3 years, has huge experience. He
but ousted by the same Mr. Advani who today wants him to take charge of a poll panel.
For instance, you may have a view on one person better meant for this job than for this job. Mr. Advani is entitled to that view. Now, these are suggestions, and the last word in all these suggestions eventually will belong to the party president who will take a decision.
Do you believe that Narendra Modi should be the head of the poll panel? The poll panel.
I personally believe that since his popularity is extremely high and his acceptability in the cadres is extremely high, he is capable of enthusing the whole entire campaign. There is a special place for him in this campaign. Now, how that special position for him is defined is for the party president to assess, consult his colleagues and take a decision.
Now, in one of his columns, Swapan Dasgupta, who observes the BJP closely, said that he believed that the Goa executive would either be a resurrection for the BJP or an insurrection. And he visualized a scenario where if Modi were not anointed, as it were, the cadres would actually take over the stage. That is the level of not just enthusiasm but irritation with the BJP dithering. Do you accept that the BJP is dithering?
I don't think the BJP is dithering, but I do accept that the sentiment of the cadre which is apparent is almost self-evident.
It is self-evident.
It is self-evident because whenever I have travelled across the country, the very mention of Narendra Modi's names, I can see the applause is far more thunderous than for any one of us.
So it's not just about somebody winning X number of elections, because tomorrow Shivraj Singh Chauhan could also win Madhya Pradesh and be a 3-time chief minister. It is about an election that you see as more presidential this time?
Well, I do see the election campaign moving in a direction where besides alliances will have a role, parties will have a role, social combinations in India has a role, but I think the personality of the leader also will have a role, particularly because the personality of and the manner of conduct of the UPA 2 has been devoid of effective leadership. And therefore, this void of effective leadership which the country is feeling may persuade the country or a large section of public opinion to come around a view that we need a strong leader in this country.
What do you see as LK Advani's role today? Because there is a perception that around him has, in a sense, coalesced an anti-Modi faction within the BJP.
That's not fair. That's not fair. You see, all of us, including Narendra Modi, who have emerged in the BJP in the last few decades, are all people almost introduced by Advani ji. We've learned a lot from him. And therefore, to say that there is a group of anti-Modi activists around him would not be fair to him. I see Advani ji as a kind of a guide or a patron in the party, and I think every word that he says, at times even if it is self-critical, we allow him that liberty to speak freely because we still stand to learn and improve on the basis of what he says.
He went public with a blog on Karnataka which upset a number of people in the party.
You see, on Karnataka, he had strong views. He'd always expressed those views. He's expressed them within the party, he's expressed them outside the party, and therefore, as I said, because of his special position, he retains that moral authority to express his views.
Would you be disappointed if the Goa executive ended without a decision on the leadership issue? And when I say the leadership issue, I don't just mean the prime ministerial candidate, because I feel that that will take a little longer, but just you're heading into assembly elections. There's a poll panel that has to be set up.
I would personally want the party, whether it's Goa or after Goa, the direction in which we are moving must sooner or later get self-evident.
Now, you spoke about how what happens within closed doors often makes its way out to the media. This may go further, Arun Jaitley, if the order by the Central Information Commission is accepted by all political parties, which is to bring parties under the RTI Act. Now, this is very interesting because while you all do file income tax returns, there was an earlier controversy where only one party agreed to put its income tax returns in the public domain, that was the CPI. Why should the public, to start with, not have the right to study your income tax, meaning the political party's income tax returns?
Effectively, they already have.
How?
You see, every party is supposed to file a return with the income tax authorities and with the election commission. Now, the income tax authorities are exempted from the scope of the RTI. The election commission is not. Therefore, the list of people who give us donations, etc., which we all file with the election commission, people have moved an RTI application before the election commission and got all those details out. So, I think this will only involve a slight change in procedure. I have only 2 points to make on this. What happens is that we come out with knee-jerk reactions on whom the RTI must apply or not apply. If RTI is to apply to bodies not funded by the government, then it will have to apply across the board. For instance, I'll give you an example. Oh, you got land at cheaper rates. Well, did the media organizations in Noida get land at cheaper rates? Therefore, must the RTI apply to them? It may be a serious encroachment of press freedom.
It's a good point.
It will apply to them. Therefore, I think at some stage there has to be a serious discussion. As far as decisions inside the party are concerned, I don't think the RTI will go to the extent of wanting those decisions to be made public. in any case, the decision can be made public. They are always made public.
No, but tomorrow you could have an RTI application saying on what basis did you not give Shivraj Singh Chauhan a place in the parliamentary board?
I don't think. I think that's carrying a debate to a ridiculous extent.
But somebody could file that.
No,
How will you stop it?
RTI only says whatever is evident, whatever records exist should be made public. So you have a resolution, please give us a copy of that. You have a decision, please give us a copy of that. What I personally feel is, if accounts of political parties are to become public, after all, countries outside, democracies outside India, the US, England, etc., which are leading democracies, every penny which a political party or the presidential candidate receives is publicly accounted for.
So shouldn't it be here as
well? I personally am not uneasy with this order. Let me make it clear.
But two statements have come. The Congress has actually made the point that a political party is a private entity. It's not a government body. The BJP's Mukhtar Abbas Naqvi has just said a political party should be accountable to the Election Commission and not to the CIC. Now, you say in principle this is a good order. How is this going to work on the ground?
Well, I don't think this order radically changes the situation. Because in terms of what Mr. Naqvi has also said, we file our returns with the Election Commission. They are making it public already through RTI applications. So what's the big deal? If somebody asks me, what's your list of donors, I'll give the list of donors which I am filing my returns on.
But when you say it's stretching the point to say that tomorrow somebody will file an RTI on how appointments are made, for example.
I doubt whether that can be done. Under the RTI Act, that can't be done. For instance, even in the government, you can ask for the minutes of the appointment order.
Yeah.
How that was done, which is not on record, can't really be asked in an RTI application.
So do you believe that there are parties who are saying the CPM today has protested this decision, the Congress has gone against it, the government is speaking slightly ambiguously?
Let me clarify my position.
Yeah.
This requires a larger debate on the applicability of RTI to private bodies outside the government setup.
By that definition, the BCCI is a private body also.
No, therefore, it requires a discussion on that. But at the same time, if accounts of political parties, etc., are publicly known, or for that matter, accounts of BCCI are publicly known, there is nothing wrong in it. After all, it will add a greater amount of scrutiny on these bodies.
But you're saying that when it comes to the source of funding, if somebody in the public wants to know what are the income tax returns of the BJP, they must go to the Election Commission. They can't ask for that directly through the
That's the position
CIC.
as it exists today.
But do you believe that should change or should it remain as it is?
Well, I don't think much would alter if it changes. Because as it is, we are filing it to the Election Commission and they are making it public to whoever files an RTI.
So when you say there's a greater debate needed, would most political parties, do you think, in a sense, appeal against this order by the CIC?
I think the great thing about RTI is everybody wants it to be applicable to the other.
That's true.
Nobody wants it to apply to himself.
But now that all political parties for once are in the same boat, what do you think the BJP will do?
You must also read Tony Blair's autobiography.
I have, yes.
Where when he comes to the Information Act, he almost curses himself for having introduced it. And therefore, I don't think that's the position in India. I still believe it's done well. And I think heavens won't fall if it applies on political parties, particularly in relation to the funding of political sources.
So the BJP will not be appealing against this order?
Well, I think the party will have to, this is purely my personal opinion, the party will sit and take a decision.
Now, you have argued today that the CBI is actually being misused to score political points. This is a argument that the BJP has made several times. But you make it in the particular context of Gujarat and its former Home Minister Amit Shah. And we have the case now of Ishrat Jahan, suspected or known to be a Lashkar-e-Taiba operative. In that case, the Home Ministry at that time changed its position. It started off by saying that she is a LET operative, then it said the evidence is not conclusive. Now you have an intelligence officer who actually sent his inputs being questioned by the CBI. Arun Jaitley, what is wrong if IB officers, because after all, if you look at America, there is congressional oversight over the intelligence bodies. What is wrong if an intelligence officer has to explain his or her
I don't
input?
mind if you have a department under the Prime Minister or under the Home Minister or some body where intelligence agencies become accountable. But this whole process of being accountable to the police, I think is a very dangerous step. What is the intelligence agency going to say? How does it collect information on cross-border communications of the Lashkar-e-Taiba? How does it do the intercepts? What is the funding sources on basis of which it has espionage in the enemy camp? Does it collect evidence entirely by legal methodologies, or does it deploy some extra legal methodologies also? How does it process that intelligence information? What is the authenticity of that? Does it cross-verify this? Now, if all this were to become subject to investigative agencies and then subject to judicial review by court, I think it will be a very serious threat to India's national security. There are some bodies which are faceless, and it's only better in a country which is so vulnerable in terms of national security that they remain faceless. Now, if you bring their activities out in public domain, now what would happen? Not only did the Home Ministry change its stance on this module being a Lashkar-e-Toiba module, the Lashkar-e-Toiba changed its stand.
Yeah.
Almost in tandem, the two stands are changed. The Lashkar-e-Toiba first on its journal puts up saying that one of our cadres has been martyred and her veil was removed and we mourn her death. And then when the case proceeds in India, the Lashkar-e-Toiba says, we are very sorry having called her Lashkar-e-Toiba. She was not an LET cadre. We apologize to her family. Therefore, they also change their stand. The Home Ministry changes its stance. And today you have a situation where the Gujarat phobia, or the Modi phobia as I call it, is taking this government and the CBI to an extent that it's going to hurt national security.
How can you prove there is Modi phobia that's driving the investigation in this case?
Well, I can tell you, if the kind of evidence which is available in the railway appointment bribery case, I've been watching that evidence in the media at least. And if I compare it with the kind of charge sheets filed against BJP leaders in Gujarat and in Rajasthan, the difference is 1 in 100 in terms of volume of evidence. That's how the CBI is behaving. It's not behaving to the best of professional standards. At this stage, that's all I'd like to say.
Isn't the debate though also about extrajudicial methods of elimination? Let's accept that there is a consensus for a moment that Ishrat Jahan was linked to the Lashkar-e-Taiba. We are a country that gave Ajmal Kasab due process.
See,
You're
issue.
a senior lawyer.
Isn't
that the root of this controversy?
I am not in favor of any extrajudicial executions. I will not justify it. I will not go to that extreme position. That's not fair in a democracy like India's, which is governed by the rule of law. But today,
the defense of Amit Shah in this case, in Sohrabuddin's case, is based on what? In the Prajapati case?
It's a case of no evidence. The linkage to the encounter is not there. That's a separate issue. But I don't want to confuse that with this stage. At this stage, if the source of information, the gathering of information, the gathering of intelligence, all this becomes a matter of criminal law investigation and then a trial and judicial review, then I think it's going to be a very challenging task for intelligence agencies. They'll go on the back foot. They'll think 5 times before feeding the states with relevant information.
So you're saying that intelligence officers should not be interrogated by the police or by the CBI for inputs that may or may not subsequently prove to be...
On the authenticity and the methodology of creating the inputs.
And do you believe that there should be parliamentary oversight over intelligence agencies?
Well, I think this requires a lot of debate. I do understand that some members have moved private members' bill and it's to be discussed. I think it requires a lot more discussion, because in every country, the kind of polity you have and the quality of polity you have also determines the vestige of the power in that polity. And I think that requires to be seriously debated before we go in that direction.
Well, summer's a time for pitched battles on and off the field, and we hope that cricket will not remain as political as politics should be. Arun Jaitley, thanks so much for talking to us. Thank you.